person that owns this car has had this thing since maybe the late 80s, if not, you know, real close to around 1980. And it got pretty rusty, so he had it painted. It was in a body shop for years. And then he brought it here. They had a lot of mechanical work done to it, link pins, king pins, rear axle seals. I don't know, maybe the transmission, I don't really even know. And so the first thing I did after I drove it, which it seemed to run okay, I built this engine in the 90s, in the 1990s, and it still runs. And it doesn't leak. I lifted it up, put it on stands, and took off the drums to see the brakes. That's the first thing you do when you buy a car from somebody. Always check their work. This nut was loose, the cotter pin was in it. I mean, loose by hand, literally. This one, you could get off with a 3/8 drive wrench, you know, which there's no way you should be able to do that if it's on right. The cylinders leaked a little. This reduction box is empty. This one was full. I wonder it didn't leak all over the shoes because with a loose nut, the seal's not going to seal right. The generator light was on. And that's because somebody put a new regulator in it, this type. This is an electromechanical regulator. And it has points in it like the distributor. And if you take the lid off one of these things and watch it function, you'll be amazed. But the thing is, if the points get stuck on this thing, the electricity from the generator can't go anywhere. And if it can't go anywhere, it turns into heat and melted the solder on the armature and some wires that go to the field windings. But again, the thing is, and they should have changed the belt. This thing's kind of tired. And the thing to do is take the belt off and release the tension from the brushes and then spin it and see if it makes bearing noise. Because no matter whether it works or not, if the bearings are bad, you should take it out and put new bearings. You can get the bearings for them. You'll need a press to change them, and just be careful, put everything back the way it belongs. There's a few odd little washers and things in there. You want to get them in the right place. They did the engine compartment. As you can see, it's really nice. The gas tank. But this is out. Or wasn't it? They didn't put this thing in. I don't know why they didn't put this seal in. This thing's pretty wiggly without it. I mean, you know, with a lot of vibration, it could possibly crack, you know, where it welds to the top of the tank or to the side of the tank. So it's not just for looks, you know, it does look kind of lame without it. But I think that's one of the primary reasons that thing's there. It's just to help support that, to prevent a lot of vibration on this. The first phone call I had from him when he said he wanted to bring it, I told him I needed to grease it. I said, I already know it's going to need lubricant everywhere. I put oil in, I took the latches out, both, and I greased them, and I got some grease prints on it, and that wipes off with something you can buy in any body shop supply shop. Wax and grease remover wipes the stuff right off, and I only wipe off once when I'm done. And if you don't see this, then this isn't fixed. Unless you change your gloves like every 30 seconds, you'd be doing it if you want to do this. But you can see there's a little grease right here. I take this thing out, make it work nice. I use the key to open this little door when you push it in to help the oil go inside. Graphite's not going to do it on an old lock. These are original. We got another set of handles he brought. He's got quite a collection. All this stuff. This is from when you could go to a junkyard and everything was there. And these things, these are like new. Well, not quite, but they're pretty nice. They got a few scratches from banging around in here. That's what we call shelf wear. But the other ones are pitted, the ones that are on it. But these are way better. So we're going to put I'm going to put those on it. He just brought those after I did all this. So these are easy to change. Notice the door panels are not on. I'll put those on last after I put some of this on. This is a liner for a floor. When you put laminate floor in a house, this is the cheapest lining you can get for it. I'm going to use that for, I cut it to this shape and glue it on lightly and then trim it. They already put this stuff in it, but that's vapor barrier. Most cars come with something like that new. And I had the latches out, the springs, no broken springs in the latches, good. Latch works fine. After it's well lubed, you can see I got some on my finger. See it? There it is. See it? Grease. You got to put grease on this stuff so it'll work. The factory, they put it on when the car is new. Even the headlight switch, on probably even new cars that have push-button switches or rocker switches or whatever, there's probably a little tiny bit of honey-colored grease on the lock somewhere. So one of the things I knew a body shop is basically a desiccant manufacturer. Every time they sand, there's dust going everywhere. So you can expect that. But in this case, you know, I did expect that. You can see this is dry. See this guy? There's zero lubrication. They sterilized these latches, all clean. This thing all clean, then installed with zero lubrication. And as you may not know it, but it's a fact, wars have been lost due to lack of lubrication. Okay, you got to grease your tanks. So I knew I was going to probably grease these. In fact, I knew I was going to grease them, whether they looked like they needed to be greased or not. And just for fun, while I was at it, I just checked these nuts or bolts. These are all loose, and those are $125 shocks. Those are Coney shocks. I put a little WD-40 on here. So it's, see how nice it spins? That's what you want. And you want a little bit on here. It's not going to hurt the brakes. You're going to bleed them. It's going to blast any remnant of any of that stuff out. And this is getting new cylinders in the back because seems like somebody washed it, and then, you know, the pistons got wet. At least the left rear, I'm pretty sure that there was water in there for a long enough period of time to get to damage the cylinder wall on that cylinder so much that you can't hone it out. And it's the pitting, it's the mating surface between the rubber seal and the cylinder that prevents leakage. And if there's pitting there, it'll leak. I can't tell you how much it'll leak, but it's the kind of thing where if you put the brakes on, a little teeny bit comes out. Every time you put the brakes on, a little teeny bit comes out when they leak. And then the dust cover fills up, and it gets to a point where it's completely full, and then you put the brakes on, and all the fluid in the dust cap blows out, and it runs onto the shoes, and then it goes on the ground. And then you see a puddle. Like, just imagine a customer. And he goes, well, I saw a puddle today, but I didn't see it tomorrow. It's because the boot's going to fill, it hasn't filled up again. And it'll fill up and then blow, and then it'll do the same thing. I mean, it's not like we could chart this. Well, maybe you could if you drove the car the same amount every day. And you know, you could actually time how long it took for that boot to fill up, like every 7 days or 17 miles, you know, the thing blows. But that's about how wheel cylinders work. When you hone these things out, you can take a wheel cylinder that's old, and maybe the inside will come up nice if you hone it out. But if you use lapping compound on it, you'll get a smoother surface than it had new. And I found German kits for these. I'm gonna put German kits in the front. I got Brazilian cylinders in the back, and I'm going to put German rubber. The FTE is the company that makes them. Ate, you know, something like that. You don't want just any old ones. One's made in Denmark, which I'm not going to say the name. The diameter of the seal is too small, and if you put those things in your car, the brand, it'll say something referring to the word. It uses the word classic in their logo or their name on the box. And I put those in my other bus, and within 2 weeks, they were leaking. And with careful study of the profile of the sealing ring on the piston, I found that the diameter and the angle is off. I can't remember exactly what it was, but the seals they don't work because they're actually, the diameter is a little small, and the hypotenuse of the profile, if you're looking at it with the seal installed, think hypotenuse. It's too short by a zillionth of an inch, and it makes all the difference in the world. But all these shocks bolts all of them are loose. They got to be tight. What I do is I take them out, I put oil on them, and I put them back in. Okay? And then I put them on really tight, tighter than the book says. The bushing compresses, so over time it's like when you stand on a carpet, or we put a table on a carpet for a long time, and where the legs are, it compresses the carpet. The same thing happens to the bushing over time. It gets shorter, so these things need periodic tightening. And then just coincidentally, in the book, let's see this? The plates, these things. See the plates? Those plates right there, they're oriented now like this by the book. It just happens to mention that, let's see, oh yeah, here we go, right here, note. excuse me, should be checked every maintenance service. Now, I don't know what how many miles that is, like 3,000. On these cars, it was 3,000 miles between grease jobs in the front and the oil change. So one of them, because this thing's been all apart, I already know that the average guy, just like this, is going to wipe everything off and put it all back together dry. And these bolts, they were all dry. I took them all out, okay? Note the position of that plate. Okay, see how the edge is there? The way you get it like that with the beam already in the car is you got to put the car on stands like this. Don't put the stands under the beam. And then loosen all the bolts and then take one out. Then pour oil on it and put it in right. Put these plates in. You're going to start all the bolts. The plate position doesn't matter because the first one you want to do is this. And the way you do it is they're all loose. You flood behind this with oil. They've all been all the way out, one at a time. Don't take them all out at once. Don't take 3 out. Take 1 out, oil it, and put it back in. And then after they're all on and everything's loose still, but they're all started, you blast this behind here with oil. In a perfect world, you could pull the beam out and sand it nice and smooth. But these things were all dry. Now, if these things come loose, which I've seen, they wiggle around, and the wiggling erodes metal from the two threads, from the thread that's in the body and the thread on the bolt. And that metal is, you couldn't see a particle of it unless you had a microscope. But if you look, you can see gray. Okay, it can be a very small amount. But what happens is that stuff gets rusty, and then it gets wet. It gets rusty, and then it welds the bolt to the threads, and you might not get that bolt out without messing up the threads. And that's not an easy fix, when you strip those out. Maybe you can put a bigger bolt in it, but you'll be busy trying to fix it. But the best thing to do is lubricate them before you put them back in. Now, I had all the bolts loose. I had a hard time getting this like this because I don't have the strength. This thing would have to rotate like a little teeny bit. With all the bolts loose, just rotate it to the back a little teeny bit to get that to go in. So what I did is with the bolt real loose, I angled this so this edge was touching. So that washer's on the bolt at an angle, and get this to engage, and then tighten the bolt, and just before, a little bit, and just before it starts to pop out, you hit it with the blunt punch, like this. See this guy? See how big it is on the end? And I slammed it, and I kept doing it until finally I got it to go in and engage. Because otherwise I never could have done it unless I had somebody helping me, or just a lot of work. I could have done it alone. I've done a lot of things alone. I'm not that big, but getting that thing in right was hard to do. And these things are really tight. And see, when they're not lubricated, there's a lot of energy you're using, especially something like this, a lot of energy you're using just to turn the bolt against the friction of the threads and between the threads of the bolt and the threads they engage with, and also the friction on the side of the shank that's holding up the weight in some conditions. And so when you oil the bolt, you can make it tighter. You're going to make it properly tight because it's turning easily. So the energy you're putting into the turning it is going into actually squeezing this stuff. Like, just think of cheese in between 2 slices of bread. That's what you're trying to do, is you're trying to squeeze the cheese, and this is the cheese. And you can't squeeze the cheese right if the bolts don't turn easily. So you want to make sure they all go in nice. They spin easy with the short ratchet, a 3 or 4 inch long ratchet. Or your fingers, with a bolt this big, maybe not. There's a lot of resistance on the shank. Okay, so that was after I did this. I wanted to grease these things. So the first thing you do is you loosen this nut, and then you turn this a little, back it off. If it's properly tightened prior to me working on it, that means that if I loosen this, I should be able to move this about 5 or 10 degrees, the link pin, counterclockwise, and this bolt should fall out or just tap out, and it wouldn't come out. I couldn't understand what was wrong with it. It's got brand new parts in it everywhere, and basically I had to pound these bolts out with a punch. This one, again, you put the nut on the end while you're hitting it to help save the threads, because you have to hit it. There's just no way. And what it was is, this new link pin kit had these in it, where the shims go. Underneath this, it was kind of embedded into a recess on, you can't really see it, the retainer for the rubber seal that's right here. They don't belong there. That's like sticking a whole bunch more shims in it, and it's not going to work because now the worm on the pin doesn't line up with the bolt. And that was fun. And then the other thing is the head of the pin was so tall. This part here, this is a genuine pin that I just started to grind on by accident because I had to grind on the new pins because this is too thick. Okay, and so if it's too high, it sticks up too high, then it might hit this. And if it hits this, well, it's not supposed to because this is stationary. And the pin, they don't move much. They may not move at all, but they're not supposed to touch this. So, and these things, in order to put these in right, you have to grind the old peen marks off and then make sure this will slip in easy by hand. Then clean it, Loctite it, and then center punch it, and the thing is in there. Now, if this one falls out on the bottom, it's not impossible for it to jam into the steering and make the car, go in the wrong direction. And so that's what I did. But I had to, at first I thought the worm was in the wrong place. But it turned out that does not belong there. I kept looking at the diagram in the book and telling myself that it must belong there because it fits into the rubber, the seal retainer so perfectly. But that's adding about, how many millimeters thick is this thing? Let's see. This thing is 4 millimeters. Just add 4 millimeters. One shim is, let's see, shim is, so that's like adding, so that's 4 millimeters. That's putting that thing in there is like adding 8 more shims. It's only supposed to have 8 shims in the first place, but the amazing thing is this, whoever made this thing, they did a really nice job making these pins and the bearings and all that. And then they added this part it doesn't need. So if you find that in your thing and you're having a headache here, because you will, you got to get rid of that part. It doesn't belong there. And then after, the way you do this is you leave this loose, you back this off a little, and you start greasing it. You want to see grease coming out here and grease coming out there. And then that's the link pin, and this is the king pin. And in a perfect world, you're going to see it coming out here and here, and on this one here, and probably underneath a little bit. There's a plug, I believe. I haven't looked for a while, but I believe there's a cap on the bottom of this, and some grease will come out of there. That way, you've greased the whole thing. I drilled these holes. I'm pretty sure they're supposed to be there. I didn't really have anything handy to compare it to, but this is so you can see the grease coming out when you're greasing it. I saw a little around here. I wasn't sure if I'd see it because of the Loctite. And then I flood this with oil. You can loosen these bolts, not too much, and it might help. But what I try to do is get oil to go behind this. Use my oil can and push the nozzle way in here as far as I can to get the oil to go this way and that way. On the back side of the plate and on the front, you try to do the same thing. You just flood it with oil, just squirt and squirt. It can make groaning noises that these things have go away. It works on all VWs with this all air cooled. This will work, except maybe a 412. I'm not sure what those things have. I can't remember. So as far as grease goes, see these bolts? Put some oil on them. Put a little oil on these. All your bumper bolts. Put some oil on all the threads. Even these, just a little teeny bit on these guys. They can get stuck. And everything tightens better when the fastener is lubricated. These guys, always a little lubrication. Then if you're working on your bus in like a year, you just finish restoring it, you can tighten up screws that might not turn if you hadn't lubed them the day you had installed them. But yeah, this was a lot of work. It's just to get these, by the time I got these 2 bolts in and finally tight, it was a long time. Because I had this thing apart and together too many times, trying to figure out what was wrong with it. And then realizing that the pin heads were too big and so forth. But it's all done now. I mean, this much is done. There's plenty more to do on this thing. The engine's going to get a release bearing. And the transmission's empty now. And if you can find magnetic plugs The tranny has two. Put these in the reduction box if you can. There's more ball bearings in a reduction box than there is in the whole transmission. And ball bearings just love to wear out. They last a lot. They don't last as long as roller bearings. So, and when I pull the motor, I'm going to put cooler seals in. This isn't even sealed. Maybe this too. But as you can see, this thing was built in the 90s. I built this engine. And it doesn't leak. This is a common leak spot. It takes two gaskets with the metal plate in between and put some sealant on it. Snug it up, and then let it sit for a couple hours with some sealant, and then tighten it up. That's one way to make this never leak. And this silicone, high temp, that stuff you can pick up everywhere, high temp silicone. Put it on here, snug it up, both gaskets. Snug it up, let it sit, tighten it tomorrow, you know. I don't know why they didn't paint this. You know, it's kind of funny, you know, all that. They do all this. See, that's from the generator dying. See the stuff blowing up here, coming off the armature, and, you know, the armature's like a fan in a sense. The battery, it's kind of tall, but it fits. Common thing is, see how close these wires are to the battery. I think the proper battery is probably just below them. I don't know. But at least it's not wiggling around too much. I'm going to check it later and make sure it doesn't slide, so it doesn't slide into these. This, you can see this is dry. This should have some oil on it, you know, and this is flipped. This should be the other way. And then when you put this thing on, put a little oil on there and put some oil, a little bit on the threads. And then when you shut this, check it, make sure this isn't grabbing these wires. But the way this thing came new is this thing was on the other side. You just flip it around. Put a little oil on these guys, see? The rollers, thing will work perfect, and it'll be quieter when you slam the door. The timing's set at 0 on this. It should be 7.5. The muffler, I put this thing on. As you can see, I welded it on. You're not supposed to weld it. If you weld it, it won't leak, and it'll cut down vibration. The muffler will last longer, a lot longer. If you weld this, putting those clamps on, the only way it's ever going to work is a brand new NOS heater box, a brand new NOS, not Germany, but genuine VW muffler and genuine clamps. That's the only way this will not leak. Every other method, it will leak. The flanges, too much work. And this is better because while you're heating it, everything's conforming because the metal gets soft. So there's no stresses on it. You know, there's no, like the heater box is pointing this way and the muffler's pointing that way, and they don't quite line up, the flange, if you use a flange, so you have to force it into position, okay? This way, you don't force it. And any force that is there from misalignment of the two pipes is gone because of the heat you're going to use. I use gas because gas, if you want to take this weld off, it'll literally chip right off. If you wanted to change the muffler, you just cut it about a ½ inch away from the muffler itself, not through the heater box. And then you stick it back on, you weld it. You just use a little rod. You can do it with gas. But the gas welding on the heater box material literally chips off. If you wanted to change the whole muffler, you just knock it off with a chisel, and it'll come right off. But it makes a really good gasket because these things never leak. There's no soot showing anywhere. I'll probably check it again later. I haven't really thought much about it. You can see that clamp didn't quite make it. See, there's a little gap. But that one, I can deal with that. But that's what I'm going to do. I might even change the exhaust gaskets. I don't know. But yeah, I built this motor a long time ago. It's pretty dry. I don't know how far he's gone, but this thing was built in the 90s. It's not too shabby. I'm proud. You know, the tranny, probably not rebuilt. But I've been draining the oil on it. It's been draining for a couple of days. But yeah, lubrication, you know, put it everywhere. Because a lot of things can be rectified, just like these door locks. They work right because they have oil on them. This thing was, the door was misaligned too. You had to really slam it. And it never really fully, see, it's got two positions. One, let's see. There's one position. You see, that's almost shut. And this is the second position. That's really shut. And I think it was only going this far to the first one. To the first one. So it wasn't really shut all the way, even though it looked like it was. And the door was misaligned, so I got the door aligned, and I moved the striker out in a little bit, because if these things are stressed like it was, then it can make the hinges crack, or the screws over here crack between the, you know, the sheet metal. And that's something that's really hard to fix. And also they like to break in the front. And if you're doing an old bus and you're restoring it, might not be a bad idea. Even if the doors are fine, to just flood the back. We used to fix them like this way back when they were broken and there was like millions of these things around. We'd pull the door off and braze it. Just fill the whole area where the crack was. They like to crack around here. And so if you make it so the door isn't stressed when you, and I oiled it, see the rust coming out from between the pin, the hinge pin, and the hinge itself. And a little oil is good, because a lot of times the driver's door doesn't get used that much. So guy drives the car around for a couple of years, and then his wife wants to get in because she can't stand the noise of the thing, and the door doesn't want to open right. It's like